After watching the video, we will use our sample lesson to begin identifying the content standards the lesson addresses, and ask ourselves which of these standards stand out as more process-driven. Then we will look at the 10 reading standards for history and select the ones that connect or align with the process standards. I will first take a look at the lesson overview, which for this sample lesson is, students will read and take notes on 2 primary source documents. The 2 documents differ in perspective and in the claims being made about integration. The students will write reflections, answer critical thinking questions, and have discussions to determine what the documents are saying and how and why they differ. Next, I want to identify my outcomes for this lesson. In other words, what do I want the students to be able to do and understand at the end of this lesson? The objective or outcomes for this lesson are: first, learn how to be a critical thinker about past events and how to engage in the kinds of tasks you will be expected to do independently in college or career environments. And second, closely read complex text. This involves identifying claims, evidence, and critical thinking. The first thing I will do is use both the lesson and the content standards to identify the content standards that are addressed in this lesson. Looking at this lesson, I identified that the students will access 2 different primary source documents to gain a perspective on a historical event. This students will then need to synthesize or combine the key parts of each piece to make a whole, while keeping in mind the time period and the author's perspective as they read the 2 documents. This provides evidence of Montana Standards for Social Studies, Content Standard 1. Students access, synthesize, and evaluate information to communicate and apply social studies knowledge to real-world situations. I will then write the complete standard in the Social Studies Content Standard column of the Video 2B handout. As I look through the lesson, a big part of understanding this evidence will be to understand state government and the role Governor Faubus played within the infrastructure of that government and what motivation was behind his use of power. This is identified in the Montana Standards for Social Studies and Content Standard 2. Students analyze how people create and change structures of power, authority, and governance to understand the operation of government and to demonstrate civic responsibility. I then write the complete Standard 2 in Social Studies Content Standard column. This lesson also focuses on the issue of people in power and segregation and the impact it had on states and communities. Therefore, connecting to the Montana Standards for Social Studies Content Standard 6, students demonstrate an understanding of the impact of human interaction and cultural diversities on societies. Standard 6 is then placed in Social Studies Content Standard column. I will then read through the standards carefully and identify if the standard is more content-focused or process-focused. Take a look at Standard 1. It reads, students access, synthesize, and evaluate information to communicate and apply social studies knowledge to real-world situations. This is definitely more process-driven, so I write process in the second column. Take a look at Standard 2. Students will analyze how people create and change structures of power, authority, and governance to understand the operation of government and to demonstrate civic responsibility. I again find this to be more process-driven, so I will write process in the second column. Finally, look at Standard 6. Students demonstrate an understanding of the impact of human interaction and cultural diversity on societies. I find this standard to be more content-driven, so I'll write content in the second column. You may have more than 3 standards, so you will continue this process for all of them. Next, I will use the Montana Standards and the Common Core Reading Standards to analyze the content standards and determine which process standards within the content standards are connected or aligned with the reading standards for literacy. Let's take a look at standard number 1. The reading standard is students access, synthesize, and evaluate information to communicate and apply social studies knowledge to real-world situations. I will take a good look at the reading standards for history to see which standard connects or aligns with this standard. Reading standards for literacy in history and social studies, grades 11 through 12, number 8 states, students will evaluate an author's premises, claims, and evidence by corroborating or challenging them with other information. This standard is very similar to Montana Standard for Social Studies Content Standard 1. I will then write the reading standard from the Common Core in that column. Now I will take a look at standard number 2. Students analyze how people create and change structures of power, authority, and governance to understand the operation of government and to demonstrate civic responsibility. Reading standards for literacy in history and social studies, grade 11 through 12, number 2 states, students will determine the central ideas of information of a primary or secondary source, provide an accurate summary that makes clear the relationships among the key details and ideas. This standard is very similar to Montana Standards for Social Studies Content Standard 2. Students analyze how people create and change structures of power, authority, and governance to understand the operation of government to demonstrate civic responsibility. I then write the reading standard from the Common Core in that column. If you identify more than 2 process standards, please continue this process with all. Now it is your turn to complete the activity. Use the lesson with text handout and work by yourself, with a partner, or a team. Once you had completed the first 4 steps, also take time to answer the reflection questions.